All right, folks, today we're going to be learning about functions again. Since we've already learned about functions, this is a little bit of a review of functions, and then talk about some of VB.NET's built-in functions that they have for our arrays, which is what we're learning right now. So today we'll sort of go back and look at functions, remind ourselves what those are and what they do, talk about arguments and returning things, and we'll also talk some more about arrays and how functions and arrays can work together. So we'll talk about functions to start, then we'll talk about some of the array functions and subroutines that are built into the system that are going to help us out, like ones that will sort arrays, like alphabetize them, and then I'll just show you an example or two. So let's get started with talking about functions again. So if you recall, a function is kind of like a little thing like a subroutine. It's like a little chunk of code that when we decide to call it, it will execute, and so we use its name to call it, and it can take these things called arguments, right? You can say a function, for example, math.round, right? You say math.round and then you pass it a number. That's an argument, and then the function rounds that number and spits it back out. So when it spits it back out, we call that returning a value. And that's what separates a function from a subroutine. A subroutine is just a chunk of code. You can pass it arguments, but it doesn't return a value. A function, on the other hand, does return a value. So when we call a subroutine, we can say, let's say I have a subroutine that's called calculate total cost. All I say is calculate total cost, and if it has an argument, I put that inside parentheses. And if I have more than one argument, I put a little comma here with more arguments. Right? This is a subroutine. I can say, hey, calculate my total cost, and then a chunk of code somewhere else will get executed. For a function, it's the same idea, except a function, let's say I have another function called calculate total cost. It also takes an argument inside parentheses, but it returns a value, which means you have to say something equals calculate total cost, right? This function will return an answer after it's done computing it. Similarly, you could say if calculated total cost is greater than 10, because if this will return a number, let's say it's 12, well, yeah, that's greater than 10. So this if statement works. Okay, so that's calling a function. You just use its name, right? And sometimes you pass it arguments by putting something inside of parentheses like this. All right, so how do we write the functions? Well, here's the general way of writing a function. I don't want you to spend too much time looking at this because I'll give you some more specific examples. But you start by saying private function, and then you give your function a name. And then if it has arguments, you put those inside parentheses like this. You start by saying by val, the argument as, and then whatever type it is. It could be an integer, it could be whatever. Then you got a whole bunch of code inside the function, and then when you're done, you return the result. This is the number that will get spit out. So let me show you what this looks like in actuality. So this is a function that I've written that's called divide by 20. And what it's going to do is going to take one argument. It's called number. So by val number as a decimal. It's going to take a decimal in called number. Okay, and at the end we write end function. So again, we start by writing private function, and we have end function in the end. The name of this function is divide by 20. And it's taking one argument by its value, a number as a decimal. It's called number. Okay. And if we want this function to divide by 20 and then return the answer, we can put whatever code we want in the inside to make that divide by 20 happen. So I could say number equals number divided by 20, right? Because here's number, that's the number that comes in. And now I'll say, all right, divide that by 20 and make number of that. So if I put in 100, we say 100 divided by 20 is 5, and so now number is 5 instead of 100. And that's not the end of it, because in the end of a function, you have to return a value, you have to spit a value back out. So here we say return number. And so that way, if I call divide by 20 somewhere, like let's say down here somewhere else in my code, I say, all right, dim my number as an integer, and I say my number equals divide by 20, and then I pass it 100 as the argument. Well, 100 comes in up here. It says, okay, my number is 100. I'm going to divide that by 20, I get 5, and then I return 5. So this whole right side simplifies to just 5, right? Even though I've put 100 in here, that becomes number when the function is called. And then that number, after getting divided by 20, is returned. So I say divide by 20 of 100. This whole thing just becomes 5, because 5 is what's returned by the function. And so if I said message box of my number, after all that, a message box would come up and say 5. All right, so that's the basic function writing. Let's do one more example to make sure that we're totally solidified with this. I ran out of space on this line, so I put on 2 lines, but it should be on 1 line, right? It says private function, which is bigger, and then it takes 2 arguments. So remember, if you have 2 arguments, everything is the same. You just have a comma here and a whole separate argument over here. So I'm taking, this function is called which is bigger. It says by val number 1 as decimal and by val number 2 as decimal. And here's my end function at the end. What this function is going to do is going to tell me whether number 1 or number 2 is bigger. Okay, so you don't have to have such simple stuff on the inside of the function. You can have some complicated stuff. So I'll say, all right, if number 1 is bigger than number 2, then, and I can add my end if at the end there, if number 1 is bigger than number 2, let's have our function return the number 1, because number 1 is bigger. Else, return 2. Okay, so this is the general idea of this function. It's called which is bigger, that's the name of it. And we get pass it two arguments, number 1 as a decimal and number 2 as a decimal, with a comma in between. It determines whether number 1 is bigger than number 2, and if it is, it returns the number 1, like the digit 1. And if number 1 is not bigger than number 2, then it returns the digit 2. Okay, so what would I do if I wanted to call this somewhere else in my code? I could say textbox1.text equals which is bigger, 24, 36. Okay, now which is bigger is the name of my function. Here it is. Right, and inside it takes 2 arguments, number 1 and number 2. So right now 24 is number 1. And 36 is number 2. That's why they're separated with this comma. And even though there's all this other junk here, by, val, as, and all that, this just all represents the first argument, and this all represents the second argument. And so that's why I have which is bigger here, and then I have 2 numbers. Well, which is bigger? Of course, 36 is bigger, but let's walk it through what the function would do. So the function gets called, it gets passed 2 arguments, 24 is number 1, 36 is number 2. Then it says if number 1 is bigger than number 2, well, 24 is not bigger than number 2. So that would send us down to the else, and then the function would return the number 2. So this whole right side is now equal to the number 2. And so we say textbox1.text is equal to 2. So our text box should come up and say the number 2. Okay, so one last little thing with functions, and then we want to move on to learn about a couple new functions. Is that when we pass an array as an argument to the function, we have to tell the function to expect an array. So let's go back for a second. Here we say by val number 1 as a decimal and by val number 2 as a decimal, right? We just say, okay, we're passing you 2 numbers. They're both going to be decimals. But we also have to tell the function if we're going to use an array, that we're going to be passing it an array as an argument. So here's how we do that. Here's my private function third element. And what this is going to do is just return the third element of an array. And I'll say by val input array, this is my first argument, as a string. Now what's different about this? What's different is that here, I don't just say a variable name, I put these parentheses right here. And this is an indication, okay, to the program that you're going to be passing an array, right? That now it knows, oh, okay, this is an array and not just, a regular singular variable. Okay, so inside this function, all I do is return the third element, which is input array of 2. Why is 2 the third element? Well, because 0 is the first, 1 is the second, and 2 is the third. All right, so one last time, we're passing, I have this function called third element. We're passing it 1 argument, but this argument is an array, right? It's called input array. And we tell the computer it's an array by adding these parentheses at the end there. That's key. And then this function is real simple. It just returns the third element, which is input array of 2. Okay, so that's it for sort of a review of functions and that last little bit there about how to pass arguments, arrays as arguments into functions. And now briefly, we'll talk about a couple of built-in functions into VB that'll help us do some pretty cool stuff with arrays. So here's the first one. It's called array.sort, and then we're going to learn about array.indexOf, and then we're going to learn about ubound. And all 3 of those are really powerful built-in functions to Visual Basic that'll do some good stuff with arrays for us. So we'll start with array sort. You guessed it, this is a subroutine. It's not a function actually, but a subroutine that will sort the elements of an array. So if you have some array, let's say it looks like this, it's called myArray. It's 12, -9, 58, and 46. If we say array.sort of myArray, and that's all you have to say, you don't have to say it equals anything, right? It's a subroutine. If you say array.sort and then you put parentheses around myArray, it will sort it and rearrange all the elements so that it goes in order. So now we go -9, 12, 46, and 58. You can see it's going up, right? Similarly, if the array has words in it, and you say array.sort of the, in this case it's the name array, right? If you say array.sort name array or whatever array you want, this will rearrange it so that it's in alphabetical order, B, K, L, M, okay? All right, so that's array.sort. That will sort stuff. Now we'll talk about array.indexOf. This is a really cool function. We say, because it returns the index of the element containing the argument that you pass to it. So if we say array.indexOf, then we say myArray, comma 12. So what does this do? This function will find where 12 is in the array and return its index. So right now 12 is in the very first box here. This is the 0th element of the array. And so you say, all right, array.index of find me 12 in my array. Right? And we'll say, okay, the function will look through all the elements, and if it finds 12, it'll tell you it's in the 0th index. Right? Similarly, if I say textbox1.text equal array.index of my array, comma 58, it will search through all the boxes of my array for 58. And if it finds it, which it does right here, this is the 0, 1 second element, it will return 2. Now, if it can't find it, right, so here I say, hey, find me the index of 99 in my array. Okay, there is no 99 here, and then that function returns a negative 1. Okay, if it returns negative 1, right, you can't index, there's no negative 1, there's nothing above the 0th element, so you'll know that this is, the 99 was not found in there. So it returns a negative 1 if you can't find it. So one last time, array.index of, first you pass it the array you want to look for stuff inside, and then you look for a particular value like this. You can use text, you can use numbers, whatever. It's kind of like needle in a haystack, right? So array.index of the haystack, comma the needle, the thing you're looking for inside the big pile of stuff. All right, last one, ubound. This one's really good. It's not array.ubound, it's just ubound. And this returns the upper bound, or in other words, the highest index of an array. So here I have an array, 12, negative 9, 58, 46. This has 4 elements, so its highest index is 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So 4 elements means the highest index is 3. So if we say textbox1.text equals ubound of my array, it will return a 3. It just tells you what the highest index is, the index of the last element in your array. Pretty simple stuff. But all 3 of those, let me go back for a second. All 3 of these are really important, right? We can alphabetize or order arrays. We can find things inside arrays. Let's say you have an array that has 10,000 things in it. First, you could put it in alphabetical order. Then you could find a particular name inside that list or a particular number. And then we could actually find out how big the array is. Because later on, we're going to learn how to change the size of arrays after the program starts. We might need to know how big it is to make that happen. All right. So now I want to just show you a couple of quick examples of how to make this work. And to do that, I have a really simple form here. And what it does is, I actually need one more button. Okay, I've got 5 little boxes on the left there, and this button is going to be my save button. So I'm going to write save in it. Okay, let me change the name to save button. All right, so here we go. I've got 5 boxes over here. I'm going to actually put names in here, okay? And then I'm going to hit save, and that's going to save those 5 names in an array, okay? Pretty simple. And then I just want to show how to use all those different functions real quick. So this one's called find David, and it's going to look to see if David is in any of these boxes in the array. And if it is, it will tell you, yeah, I found it, and if it isn't, it will tell you, no, I didn't find it. Here, I have another button that's called array size, and that will just tell us how big the array is. The answer should be 5, because there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements. And this one will alphabetize the names and spit out the first one so we can see who has the name that's closest to A. So let's go ahead and program all these. First, I'll program the save button. I've got 5 text boxes here, and I want to save those in an array. You should know how to do this at this point because we had a project that involved this. So first, I'm going to declare the array. I'm going to call this dim names. That's the name of my array. And there's 5 things there, so I say dim names of 4 because I have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 as they're going to be named, so I'll call it a string. So hopefully that's good for you there. All we're doing is declaring the array, okay? And it has 5 elements, so we say dim names 4 as a string. Okay, when they hit the save button, we want to save all the stuff from the text boxes into the array. And there's no short way to do this. Names of 0 equals textbox1.text. Names of 1 equals textbox2.text. Names of 2 equals, I screwed up, textbox3.text. Names of 3 is equal to textbox4.text. And names of 4 is equal to textbox5.text. Okay, so what did I just do there? All 5 of these text boxes, these first 5 text boxes, 2, 3, 4, and 5, are getting saved into our array, which is called names 0 through 4. Okay? And that's all I'm doing in the save button. That just takes the stuff from the text boxes and puts it in the array. All right, so what's next? Let's do find David. The objective here is to find a function, okay, to find the name David in the array. If it does have David in there, it'll tell you which box it's in, okay? And if it doesn't, it won't. And to do this, I'm actually going to write my own function in the find David button, okay? And this is going to be called I'm going to say private function. And this function, what we're going to do with it is we're going to have it find whether David is in the array or not. So we'll say David exists is the name of the function. We're going to pass it by val an array, okay, my array. So we'll call it name array as string, right, because the array has strings in it. And we'll also pass it, no, that's all we're going to pass it, because we're looking for David. Now, is that right? No, because I just gave you a whole lecture about arrays, and one of the key points was if I'm passing an array as an argument, I need to include little parentheses like that to tell the computer, hey, I'm passing you an array. All right, so what am I doing here? I'm writing my own function. So I write private function, I write end function. The name of this function is David exists. It's going to ask the question, does David exist in this array? And notice I've got this called names is the name of the array up here. But inside the function, I've got another name for it, name array. It doesn't matter what you name the stuff inside a function. Those are kind of like local variables. They only exist within this function. Okay, so what do? I want to detect whether David exists or not and return, maybe true if or 1 if he does exist and 0 if he doesn't. So what can I say? Remember, we have our really good friend, this array.indexOf, and then the first thing we pass array.indexOf is the name of the array. So here that's called names or name array, right? And then we pass the thing we're looking for. We're looking for the word David. All right, so what does this do? It says find me the index of, within name array, an element that's called David. So I'm looking for David inside my name array, and if I find it, this function will return its index, right? And if I don't find it, if you recall, this function will return -1. So I can say if this whole thing equals -1, then, well, that means we didn't find it. So we'll return a 0 in that case. Else, we'll return a 1. All right, so what's going on here? One more time. I've got a function that's called David exists. We're going to pass it the array of names. Okay. Once inside, we're going to use our function array.indexOf to look through this name array, that array of names, for David. If we find it, then array.indexOf will return the index of where David is at. It could be, let's say, 6, or there's only 0 through 4. Let's say David was in the 4th box, then names of 3 would have it. Okay, so that means that array.indexOf would return 3. If it doesn't find David, then it will return -1, and so this will be true, and this whole function, David exists, will return a 0. If it does find it, then it will return a 1. Okay, so how do we use this? So we go back here, we're going to say, all right, when I click the Find David button, I'll say dim the search result as an integer. Okay, this is just something I'm making up, search result. And I'll say that search result is equal to David exists of the names array, which is called names, comma, David. No, I don't even need to give it a second thing, my bad. Okay, so what's going on now? I'm passing the names array, which is getting its value right here, to the function David exists. And even though it's called names here, once we get inside the function, it gets renamed as the name array, just temporarily while we're inside here. Now my search result will be a 0 if David was found, or sorry, if David was not found. It'll be a 1 if David was found. So we can say if search result equals 0, which means that we did not find David here, right? Because that means that index of returned -1. Then that means we didn't find David. We could say the text box on the right side here, right here, is called the output text box. So if the search result is 0, then I didn't find David. I want to say output text box.text equals David not found. Okay? But if I did find David, right, then I want to say, output text box.text equals David found. Okay? And that's it. Let's run this and see what happens, and then I'll go back and just review it one last time. All right, let's put some names in. Alex, Michael, John, Lewis, and David. Okay, let me save those in the array, and then I'll press Find David. And look, David was found. That's right. He's right here. But if I take him out and say, instead of that, I can save this again and hit Find David, and now David is not found. If I put him in here, hit save, find him again, there, he's found. Okay, so again, let's just go through what that did. First, when we press the save button, we're storing all 5 names in the names array 0 through 4. Okay? We declared, of course, the names array up at the top. It's a global variable. Okay, then I wrote a function called DavidExists, which asks, okay, if array.index of name array comma David, in other words, if we can find David inside the name array, okay, so if we can't find David, which means if this thing returns -1, which means we did not find David, then we're going to return a 0. And this whole function, DavidExists, will give us a 0. But if we can find David, in other words, if this whole thing where we search for it does not equal -1, it will equal the index where David can be found, then we will get a 1 when we call this function. So up here I say, I declare a search result, okay, which is just some little integer that I've made up. And all right, I say search result is DavidExists, and then I pass it the names thing, which has all of my names in it. Okay, so if David exists, then search result will be a 1, right? Because this thing says, all right, if I can't find it, then give me a 0. If I can find it, then give me a 1. So this whole search result will be a 0. If I can't find it, it will be a 1 if I can. So if I say if search result is 0, then we didn't find him. Otherwise, it's not a 0. That means it's a 1, then we did find him. Okay? All right, so that's it for that one. Let's talk about array size. This one's a lot easier. Right? If I click on array size, I want to know how big the array is. So I'm going to use my new function ubound to make that happen. I'll say output textbox.text equals ubound of names. Okay, so this is really easy. Ubound just tells you the upper bound of a array that you pass it. It tells you the highest index. And this is not right. Let me tell you why. Say I'll put 4 names in here. This is just junk, but whatever. Right? And I hit array size. It's going to say 4, right? But I actually have 5 names here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have to remember, again, with arrays that we start at 0. So this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We actually have 5 elements in the array, but the highest index is 4. Ubound gives us the highest index, so we might want to add a +1 here so that it's clear to the person using the program that, yeah, we have 5 names. Let's try that one more time. And if I put a bunch of junk and hit array size, I'll get 5. Okay, easy. All right, last bit, almost done. First name alphabetically. This is one of my favorite ones. So we can use our brand new function that we learned called array.sort. This is going to put our names in alphabetical order. So if I pass this names, it doesn't have to return a value or anything. It's a subroutine. You just say array.sort, and then you put the array in there that you want to sort. And that's it. It's going to sort it in alphabetical order. Then if I want the first, the name that's closest to A in this one, well, that's really easy. That's going to be the first element in the array, or the 0th element in the array. So I'll say output textbox.text equals names is the name of the array, 0. So first I'll sort the array. I'll put it in alphabetical order, and that means that the very first element, the 0th element, will have the name that's closest to A in it, and that I'll put that right out in the text box. Let's try it. I'll put in David. I'll put in Aaron, which we'd hope would be the name that's closest to A, and Zach, which is the furthest. I'll save that. First name alphabetically is Aaron, right? It's gonna. So what happened is when I press the first name alphabetically button, the array gets sorted using array.sort, which puts it in alphabetical order, and then the output text box gets the very 0th element, the first element in the array that has the name that's closest to A in it. So that's how you use a bunch of different functions. That's how we write our own function and pass it an array as an argument. Hopefully you guys are pretty clear on some of this stuff, and you can go ahead and get started on the next few assignments. So let's go back to the PowerPoint real quick. I want to just give you some vocabulary for today. So I'm going to have to do this as on the fly because I forgot to do it. Vocabulary. First we need to look at array.sort. We need array.index of. And we need ubound. And that's it for today. Okay, get started.